Hey, you have Patrick Findaro here, co-founder of Visa Franchise. Excited to be joined by Kate Alonzi, who's an immigration attorney we've been working with on E-2 visa cases. She is the managing attorney at Alonzi Law Group. Kate, thanks for joining today.
Oh, thank you, sir. I'm really excited to talk about the E2s. As you know, I'm also here on an E2. I've been here on an E2 for a decade with multiple renewals. So this is a topic kind of close to my heart. And I have, my passion is business. So anything business in E2 related, which is actually same thing to me, is what I'm happy to help.
So in terms of today's conversation, there's different ways to get an E2 visa, which I would love you to go through kind of just a summary of the E2 visa, but we're going to be focusing on opening a new business, opening a new franchise, because you can also buy an existing one and that has its own pros and cons. But in terms of today's conversation, this is for people that largely are trying to invest 80K, 100K, 120K. As we found existing businesses, generally it's higher up, 200K plus, which will be a topic for another video. So Kate, maybe I could turn it to you, and if you could just give a summary of the E-2 visa and what people really need to understand.
Okay, so when it comes to new businesses, right, I always talk to my clients and tell them, listen, it's much easier if you were an entrepreneur in your home country, right? Because you have the idea of business is the same whether you run it in China or US. What changes is the regulations surrounding the business. So if they come to us and they have run businesses before, that's a much smoother transition into the US. When I talk to my clients about the E2 visa, it's really talking to them in a lot of ways about the business itself, right? So the regulations and requirements as we go through them kind of make sure or try to make sure that you succeed in your venture. That's why we have the substantial investment, right? So if you were starting your company, if you're a Canadian, for instance, and you were starting your startup in Canada, you would also have to make sure that the startup is substantially capitalized to allow you to start operations, right? So that kind of, feeds into the same thing. So that's how I explain that to my clients. So let's talk about the service-based companies, because
And
those
I
are
just
the
want to echo
companies
that
that,
point because you brought up a really good point. Like if you were an entrepreneur before, opening a business and getting the E-2 visa can make a lot of sense. If you are an employee, probably better to look through employment, transfer some other way. And from our clients, hundreds of clients over the years, the most successful cases, generally they had businesses before. There are some exceptions with managers with full P&L responsibility, but just that mindset shift,
yes,
if you have to do the mindset shift into going to entrepreneurship together with changing countries, that's tough. Ideally,
that is
you
tough
already have the
indeed.
mindset, you have the shift of mindset in the same country or just the one, but doing those two, it's really, it's quite stressful.
Okay, so let me tell you, I've been in business for almost 20 years, right? Ever since, I became of age to be able to run a business. So I've been in real estate, restaurants, business consulting, as you know, and also law as well, both immigration and business law. So for me, coming over to the US was a big change, right? Even from the UK, even though we speak the same language, there's cultural differences. And having to start from zero, like with no family and stuff, that in itself puts pressure on you as a business owner, right? So when it comes to mixing the two together, so new to entrepreneurship, because at that point I wasn't new to entrepreneurship. I run many successful businesses, right? Being here as a new entrepreneur, completely new to the country, adds an extra layer of complexity. Now, when it comes to, so let me explain a little bit further. You don't have to be an entrepreneur, particularly if you're in the IT business, let's put it this way, right? Because it's so easy to run your business, you have a skill, right? And then you're able to lend that skill to the business, and all you need to do is add employees to generate the revenue, right? So let's put it this way: this is much easier. The same with service-based businesses. But when it comes to new products, or completely new ventures, that's when it gets a little bit tricky. So typically there are certain types of personalities, of course, that do much better in those circumstances. And some that would benefit more from a very established, but purchasing an established business. But then when it comes to investment, do I have the 200, 300K to buy an established business? Or do I, go down the road of a franchise? And then many clients are averse because they don't like the 10-year, 5-year, or whatever year commitment, and to share their royalties, right? So there is a ton of different, the way I look at it, it's much easier to do, like I said, the IT consulting, for instance, businesses.
You stick in the same industry. If you're an employee, you stick in the same industry. If you're an entrepreneur, you have more flexibility.
Correct, right? Because so running a business in the US is not very different than running a business in your home country. It's as stressful, same. But yeah, when you're new, it kind of adds the layer of complexity that, and that's why people struggle with the E-2 process too, right? Because I always tell my clients, look at the E-2 investment. In many ways, it should not be considered investment at all. It's actually E-2 expense. So what do you spend your money on? What do you commit your money to? For us, investment means more of a passive stuff where you put money, and that's what people get it confused, because they think all of a sudden you put money into a bank account and that's considered investment, because that's what it means.
It's the initial expenses to get the business going.
The
That's
initial
probably a better way to
expenses.
look at it.
Yes, correct. So same, So nothing to do with the investment per se as we know it, but everything to do with starting a business and spending enough money to qualify to get the business operational. But in our entrepreneurial mind is also get the business to the point of being operational, so automatically compliant with the E-2 visa requirement, right? So I mean, for people who have been in business like me, apart from the treaty country requirement, which limits, of course, who can come over here on an E-2 visa. And apart from, directing our entrepreneurs to own at least 50% of the business, that is not a requirement in any other, if you voluntarily start the business, it doesn't matter. So for the E-2 visa, the rest is actually making sure that the business is set up for success. So actually, the E-2 requirements help the entrepreneur to start a successful startup.
Yeah, and the denials I've seen, like earlier in our career, like we had a client that didn't have a signed lease, and it was just like a letter of intent. And I could see why the consulate officer denied it, because they weren't close operational. They didn't decide where the operation was going to be. So I guess, when are you comfortable with having the client go in for that E-2 visa interview when they're opening up a new business? How close does it need to be to operational, or does it already have to be operating and making money?
It depends. So this is quite a tricky scenario, right? Sometimes it would be best by any means for the business to be operational, but you can't work in it, right? So it's an egg and a chicken question. How do we get this sorted? But yes, once the business is almost operational. So with the E-2 requirements, the investment has to be substantial. When you commit your money, so you spend your money or you escrow your money in accordance with whatever is best for your business to actually make it work. So let's run with the IT business. You have equipment in the form of computers. You have, maybe a car that you need to travel to your client's sites, right? Because without it, you can't actually travel, and everybody in the US needs a car. So that would be a business car. Let's say that you need some platform to host or some data center or something like that. That can run up, 15, 20K if prepaid. So there's a lot of ways that you can capitalize your business to make sure that it's going to be successful and it's going to give you the best chance of getting an E-2 visa, right? So the minute we go in for the interview, the business is almost ready to be operational, but for the E-2 visa. So we're saying,
You need
hey,
the visa to start running the business.
Correct.
That should be the last thing, right? As long as you get the
Correct.
E-2 visa, you can step in and get it open.
That's essentially what I refer to in my legal letters, the summary letters, right? So the minute I petition on behalf of my clients, the minute this is going to be operation, the minute we go to the consulate and the person gets a visa and it takes whatever, 7 days for the passport to be delivered back to them, and they cross that border, they're ready to start their business. So there is no other expenses essentially required to make it work.
Are there any issues in terms of like the entity structure, whether it's a C corp or LLC?
I've seen all sorts.
Yeah.
And typically, the C corp and the LLC stuff. So LLC is a foreign concept to many foreign entrepreneurs, and I'll tell you why. It's a pass-through entity, so it works more like a sole proprietorship, right, for other countries. So the equivalent in the UK is almost a hybrid between sole proprietorship, for instance, and limited company. So Canada has limited companies, UK has limited companies, and those two are completely different than the LLC structure in the US. In terms of approvals for the consulate, it really, really doesn't matter. Remember that those people, whilst they adjudicate those cases, have not had any business experience probably. So the simpler, the better, or at least for the attorney to put it into simple terms to explain it. But to your point about LLC and C Corp, is double taxation. You get taxed on company income as well as at the corporation rate tax, and then you get taxed on your dividends. Whether with the LLC, that's a pass-through entity that just flows directly to you. When they're here for at least 6 months, S Corp is probably the way to go for some. I'm not a tax attorney. It's just the knowledge that I have acquired over the years working with clients,
hundreds of clients
and setting up their businesses. But yeah, that's one of the things. And, I can't tell you how many phone calls I've had when people just called me up and said, Kate, we must set up a C Corp in Delaware.
Exactly.
That's the goal.
That's like, all right, maybe if you're like a Fortune 500 company, like, or there's got to be like a really good reason for that. Because you're in most states and most industries, you're going to need an LLC or a C Corp in that state to be operating the business with a local business permit. So I mean, I'd say 95% of our clients do LLC for the state they're going to operate the business, and then 5% or in a certain state where they're operating a home care, health-related business or a property management type business where they might need to have a C Corp. And just for those clients, they then have to deal with the two-tiered structure. But I mean, that's I guess a bit of a benefit with franchises is the franchisor working with us. We're going to know that. And we had earlier issues, earlier when we launched Visa Franchise where clients didn't know certain regulations and we didn't ask the franchisor up front. So a client would open an LLC, then have to switch to a C Corp. But ideally, we understand the industry and the state that you're going to operate the business in earlier so we can have the correct entity.
And the franchisors offer the extra layer of protection and any licenses, right? That's particularly important from property management businesses. Because in many states, you actually have to be a broker, right? To be in that position.
So the franchisor allows the E-2 visa investor to hang their license with a broker that's pre-approved and facilitates. So they're not cold calling, trying to find someone to hang their license.
And we do a lot of those. It's nice that you started talking about the real estate. We do a lot of cases in both at my business consulting business with America for startups, and here at the Lonzi Law Firm for home flipping businesses or property operations company or property management. Those are startups too. So that ties in nicely into the whole theme of today's conversation. There is a ton of people in Canada predominantly who are into real estate. So they do home flips there. But because the market is so saturated at this point and it's so expensive to
Well, also the
purchase.
tax, you have to pay a cap gain every time. And when you sell a property in Canada, from what I understand,
Correct.
where in the
And
US, most of the time you can avoid the capital gain and just roll it into the next real estate investment.
yeah, which is nice. So there is a tremendous interest on that front, and a big and a lot of my clients are doing that, right? So
How
it's
do you
just
demonstrate
about,
the jobs? So for those businesses, those startups that aren't like opening up a cafe or opening a painting franchise where it's going to be clear there's employees,
Mhm.
what do you want your clients to show in terms of like contractors or job creation before they apply, as well as in those 5 years for the business plan?
Okay, so I am comfortable with submitting cases even if no employee is on board yet. And I will tell you why. This is more of a business decision. Getting somebody, the likelihood of having an employee in the first startup stage to stay with you beyond 2, 3 months, it requires a different set of skills. And I have seen many of my clients retain somebody and then they fire them after 1 or 2 months because the employee is looking for structure. Startup does not provide structure, right? So unless you partnered up with somebody, and sometimes we do have partnerships in the US with
Or someone
immediate
you know,
employees.
maybe they're not even an equity partner, but it's a friend of a friend that's going to be loyal to you, and you already have a pre-existing relationship with that person.
Correct. So that's a nice way to do that. And then to show growth, remember real estate, property operations company, the nature of the business is a lot different when it comes to the building industry and construction industry. And that is because most of those people work as contractors, right? So when you hire somebody to do refurbishment, and all sorts, right? You still have what's called the cost of sales. So you have the revenue, cost of sales, and a big chunk of that, of job creation and stimulating the American economy, stems from actually that, right? So yeah, you could have a general manager, you could have an admin person that helps you as employees. But then the stimulating factor for the US economy, stemming from engaging US based contractors and companies, it is a really good argument. So like I said, I always revert back, what's the nature of the business? Does it make sense?
Yeah,
And
how are
then
Americans running that business? So
correct.
why would
Because
the US government expect you to have a bunch of employees where Americans run the business with 1099 contractors, and that's how it's been for the last 50 years?
yeah, correct. So just let's run with this idea. All of a sudden, from the start, let's assume the investment is 200K, right? And we have 3 employees on record, and all of those employees will cost you 5 to 6K, and they don't generate revenue, right? In the first year, you're likely to make a loss unless you have, sales generating employees that all of a sudden become star employees of the month, and then they get you so much business. So that's one way of looking at that. It doesn't make sense. It just really doesn't to me. So if it makes sense business wise, there is a legal argument for it, right? So I always say E-2 visa, business success, they're interconnected. Whoever wrote the regulations, they're just making sure that people who have never run a business are able to do so through sufficiently capitalizing the business, on and on, right? So for me as an entrepreneur, that's a logical state of affairs.
And then in terms of source of funds for these expenses, like Could you use money that you won from a casino and that's not documented? Could you use a sale of a property? What are acceptable sources of funds for those initial expenses to go to the E-2 visa?
So I have never had a client who won that much in the casino. Maybe one day I will have to contemplate that issue. Because when it's not documented, I assume when you win in a casino, there's some sort of proof
Yeah,
that the
probably
money
depends
has
on the
been won.
country and the legitimacy of the casino, but
Yeah, but let's run with this idea. So think about this. I always tell my clients, think about applying for a mortgage, right? And the bank wants to make sure that you are not a money launderer and your money came from legitimate sources. And they ask you, Patrick, please provide me with the bank statements for the last year, and please tell me what the source of your money was. Same principle applies here, right? Let's run with the idea of a home sale, and then anything qualifies. I mean, loans qualify provided they're not collateralized against the assets of the business, right? So if you fail on your loan, automatically the business is folded because the bank has the right to take it over. Then we have gifts. If you have a nice auntie or family member, mom and dad, that would qualify too, provided we have a statement of some sort or a letter describing that there is no need to repay the money. And then we get into, investments. I sold my house, for instance, or I flipped a home, and this is what the source of my money is. And in that case, we would go, to the source, provide this sale agreement, provide the bank statements showing the money being deposited into your bank, and then however you move your money, you have to document it too. So think of it as A to Z. This is the source, and every time you move the money, hopefully in big chunks, because there's sometimes some people who are like have 500 transactions, and it's just difficult to keep track of it. So in that case, the strategy is different. Like I said, every case is different, but to simplify it, think of it as getting a mortgage and just making sure that your money came from the bank is making sure the money came from legitimate sources.
And I think people need to think about, with a startup, franchise is a little different because it's going to be pretty predictable, the ramp up period. But your own independent startup, it could go really well and you're most likely going to sell to some competitor, or it doesn't go so well and it fails and you close. So what happens if one of those scenarios happens after 2-3 years, you close the business, or you have some crazy offer for 10x the revenue to sell your business? What happens? Do you
So,
lose the E-2 visa? What?
so you are in status. So when you get your E-2 visa, your company name is stamped into your passport onto the visa, right? So anything that is connected within that company, the minute it terminates, you're technically out of status. What I like doing for my entrepreneurial clients is recommend this holding company structure if they're looking to grow into other areas, right? And with this, the holdco is what gets the E-2 visa. And if one of the businesses fail, then the risk is mitigated, right? So yes, we can think ahead. Or, let's assume somebody didn't have that holdco structure and they just had a single LLC and that fails. Then are you looking to invest into another business? We could file a different case, right? Or I'm working on a client just now who was in the real estate business, got his visa in 2018. The real estate business, due to COVID, kind of fell apart. That was a tough time for everybody. So, we are essentially submitting a new application because he developed a new way or diversified, right? So again, then we go back to the entrepreneurship. Is the client entrepreneurial and willing to try other things? And then I'll give them the options. Or is the client saying, oh, I did this, it didn't work, I just want to go home. Or I want to switch I want to change status to, for instance, a TN visa if they have background in certain industries, or anything whatsoever, right? But so the way we offset entrepreneurship, remember as well, and that's why it goes into my analysis when I speak with my clients, is the person who's the spouse. If they're a spouse type scenario, they can work, right? So they can obtain a W-2 and go and work in a business, right? Whatever they desire. Sometimes those are lawyers, doctors, IT specialists, on and on. So ultimately, from day one, the need to have high revenues in year one is mitigated because this spouse can generate income, right? So there is a ton of ways, and I always think about my clients to give them the most options that is within the E-2 visa framework, but that will work with, and that will work in the unlikely scenario that they fail.
Yeah. I
Because
think,
I mean,
I think,
you've
one second.
got to try. If you don't try,
I think the holdco structure is especially important for those folks that have zero intention ever to get a green card, or at least not in that initial 5-year period. Where if maybe you want to have a green card and there's a possibility of getting it in 2 years, and it's pretty clear that your spouse can get a EB2NIW, EB1A, whatever green card category, it might not be necessary having like separate LLCs, but if that's not the case, then it's a good insurance plan to give you optionality. And we've had clients that have the franchise as really the anchor, and that's what creates jobs, but they're doing online businesses where all the employees are in Pakistan and it's e-commerce and there's no need to have US employees. So it'd be a horrible E-2 visa business. There's no there's no benefit beyond the owner and what he makes from the business in the US, or minimal
correct.
benefit, I should say. But able to have everything kind of in that same structure and having flexibility.
Flexibility. Yeah, and to be honest, and equally, if they were, let's assume that they've done this e-commerce as their main E2 business, right? So of course, they're to remain compliant, they would have to hire 2 or 3 people, right, in the US at the time, not at the time of filing necessarily, but towards the end. It depends what impact the US product has on the economy as well. I mean, if we're doing something special, and I'm just going to tell you, a client of mine has products for sales products for incontinence, especially important for women and stuff. I mean, that has such gravity, and the product is so popular that even though he has employees elsewhere, we could argue. So it's just case specific. See what I mean? There's
Sure.
a lot is involved, and if I can, just understand that business wise, like I said, I can make an E2 visa case because those people
What
are
so
looking
what
for
is the
the same.
government so for those that aren't going to have a lot of employees, like how do you argue the case? Is it taxes generated? Like why is the US going to accept this person, this E2 visa investor?
So yes, so we argue that the revenues generated stimulate the economy. That's one thing. The products usually purchased in the US, cost of sales, that stimulates the economy. The impact the employee has, remember, because they actively spend their money they make through the business, they spend it in the US, that stimulates the economy. So you can go, A, B, C, D. It's never straightforward, and there's never a perfect case, and each case has its weaknesses. So long as my clients are are willing to accept an element of risk, so they're advised to do X but they don't do it, and then so long as they're able to deal with that risk, I am good with it. It's a business decision, right? So as an attorney, yes, of course, I'm going to tell them that's the way it should be. But essentially, as you know, what clients do and what they tell you they would do sometimes doesn't,
Match up.
which is, it's the nature of business. Let's put it this way.
Kate, I think we can go into some of the questions we have from Augustina. Do I have to go through the process in my country to apply for the E2 visa, or can I do it from the USA?
Okay, so you could do it through the USA through change of status, provided you have a visa that allows us, non-immigrant visa that allows us to adjust your status. So that visa is usually B1, B2, right? If you don't have that and you have an ESTA, which is called a visa waiver, then you don't have a basis to adjust your status, to change your status, essentially. Consular processing is what I always recommend. And I will tell you for a multitude of reasons why. For instance, it gives you a visa in your passport and allows multiple entries back and forth into the US. It doesn't expire like the status change with USCIS the minute you leave the US. It lasts typically longer than 2 years that you have with USCIS. And while USCIS is more prompt if you pay the extra money, so premium processing is 2,500, and the fees associated, about 1,000 or so, depending on how many dependents you have.
Yeah.
Then yes, you can have your answer returned sooner. It just depends on the client's scenario. That was really, really popular, the double filing, what I call. So filing with consulate as well as filing with USCIS during COVID, when consulates were shut down.
Because some consulates were shut down for like 2 years where they just weren't processing E2 visas.
Or Colombia, right? I recently reached out to you. They recently started processing visas. We had a client who was
we had an approval a couple months back that was in backlog for like a year.
Yes, correct. So they were not accepting any applications whatsoever. So that would be a good way. Or if somebody just says, Kate, I purchased this business, I want to work straight away in my business, I don't want to wait. So yes, we could do the double filing again. But like I said, it's a cost benefit analysis to the client. Do you want to spend an extra 5K or whatever attorney fees on top of that to file with the USCIS? And as you know, USCIS is really the RFEs, so request for further evidence, is really popular with the USCIS now. They need to buy themselves time and make some extra money. So it is not guaranteed that you'll actually get depending on the case, of course. If it's a lower investment, it is not guaranteed that you're going to get your decision within 14 days, even if you prepay the premium processing amount. So consular all the way for me, unless there is some circumstances where the client can't travel back to their home country, on and on. But yeah, consular is the way to go for most applicants.
Kate, we have other questions here, but most of them we already addressed. Can you think of any frequently asked questions for those that are doing an E2 visa startup business, a business from zero, whether it's independent or a franchise?
Yeah, so most frequently asked questions, Kate, what do I invest in? So what do I spend my money on, essentially? So again, for entrepreneurs, this is not a big deal. They will know fair and well. Let's address something else, because I think it's really, really important. Let's assume the person has a company back home, or they've already started the US company years back, and they have some historical expenses, right? We could use those, provided the inventory is used for this company, or if there's some sort of agreement. We can absolutely use those to make sure to prop up the investment levels. And there's sometimes clients who come to me and say, Kate, I don't know how I'm going to invest the money. I'm working on multiple cases just now, but they were here in the US on, for instance, J1, J2 state status as a spouse. And they've already run in a successful business, right, in the US. So all we need to do is say, hey, can you show me your expenses from the last year or 2 years? And then pay the legal fees. And to be honest, we're good to go.
And that's a thing where the investment could have been 10K if you're then making 100K from that business and you have like a couple Americans, like
Correct. So that's what I mean. That's a lot of, because a lot of people do not understand the E2 visa, and sometimes those issues are not discussed. So yeah, that's a big thing. If you have something back home, whatever product that is, and if you're going to now sell the product, I mean, we're talking about fashion companies, we're talking about manufacturers, we're talking about e-commerce people. Moving that inventory to the US
that's an
is
investment.
sometimes like a great way to have the investment already at the start without having to spend anything additionally. So to be honest, the hardest cases are the very first time entrepreneurs who do not know how to spend their money because they're not very well versed in business too, or they do not understand which expenses would qualify for the E2 visa. Most of the expenses would, right? So expenses such as equipment on a DS-156E, the investment is divided into 5 different categories, right? Some of that can be cash in the bank. Those are seen as not committed funds, but I always allow my clients to have a certain level of cash in the bank.
What would you say, like
As that
10K,
helps.
10, 20K?
Depends on the case,
Yeah,
because if we have a case that qualifies on its own merits as well, if they have a little more, you know,
great.
that is not an issue. But if they're qualifying on a 60, 70, 80 case, and then they have 30K in the bank account, then we are kind of getting into squirmy waters. So there is and justification for that is a good business justification. Those people need the money in the bank account. The minute they start being operational, there's going to be expenses thrown at them, right? So to cover the first 1 to 3 months or 1 to 6 months, that's a good way of making that into your E2 investment, but also making sure that you have the immediate capital to spend the money should any need arise. And a lot of it arises once you start running a startup, right?
Well, Kate, I really we have one more question we'll answer, and then we'll close out today's session from Pulkit. Can E2 visa holders get rejected at the border when entering back into the US, similar to a TN visa, assuming the visa was granted before the person in question left?
Okay, so traveling back and forth while you have an E2 visa. So I can tell you, if your file is sometimes flagged up with the CBP, and that could be for a multitude of reasons, right? But if you're already being pulled into secondary, like some of our clients, for instance, from Latin America, before you travel, then I'm not going to say that this magically will disappear when you have an E2 in your hand. Now, this adds legitimacy to your travel because you're going there with the intent to run a business, because they're already assuming you're going to stay, right? You have a visa for 5 years or whatever. But that magically does not remove the issue, right? So if there's criminal convictions, or if you overstayed, or illegal entry, or if you had already applied for, I'm dealing with a case actually just now, a DV lottery applicant won the lottery but was not granted the green card based on a technicality. So every time she travels, she gets flagged up, right? So actually, I'm having the deja vu. That's a question she asked me yesterday. So I said to her, listen, we do not have a magic wand, and obviously it's the CBP's officers' work. They're responsible for the people they let into their country. So there's some level of, trust involved, and it's their job essentially, right? So when we get into somebody who's had those issues, yes, E2 visa will make it more likely so that they already know that you have invested substantially into a business. You are going there for 4 years, whatever the length of the time is. and then you will come back. As to whether you're going to be pulled into the secondary interrogation or not, might be or might not be. That depends on the CBP officer as well.
How does it work? Because I've had a lot of clients that have submitted a petition already for immigrant status, like EB-5, or their petition's already been approved, but they're just waiting for the visa bulletin. We're not attorneys, so we haven't gotten involved in like the mechanics of all that. But
Okay.
how do you see that in terms of like if you've already shown intention somehow, like you applied for the lot early, you've actually applied, you've submitted a petition, or your petition's already been granted?
Okay, so let me tell you this. That affects one of the requirements, which is the intent. The intent of the applicant is to return to your home country once your E-2 visa ends or terminates. The intent, that those waters are muddied when you have already, when you're applying to the consulate saying you're going to leave, but when you have a petition pending which says you're going to stay. As to how much leeway we have, it depends when your visa is coming up for renewal, right? So if you, and that comes up really, really often with citizens, for instance, of Indian or Pakistani descent, when they have a family here with that who petitioned for them, 5 years ago, but the bulletin is not current. So they're going to wait 10 years or whatever until that materializes. Does that impact their intent at the moment of applying the E-2 visa? Yeah, in some way, yes, but certainly not as you would have with a client whose bulletin is coming up recent and they're applying for an E-2 visa and saying, hey, by the way, I have an intent to leave, but I also have an intent to stay. A lot depends in those circumstances, provided that the client, proceeds given the risks. A lot of depends on the CBP officers or consular officers that they're going to get.
Very good answer, Kate. And for those that are interested, they're exploring the E-2, maybe other visa categories, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
They can call me anytime. I think we've worked enough now that I always answer my phone, and usually I answer my phone to clients, and we offer free consultations. So if you actually, would you guys be able to share my email or my phone number or in the chat box?
For sure, probably the best would be email, and we'll put that on the screen, and then
okay,
hold your cell phone for later.
Yes, awesome.
So you have it there. K. Alonzi at e2visalawyers.com if you're interested in scheduling a free consultation with Kate. Kate, I really appreciate you and all you do for our clients. And you have obviously a very high level empathy, having gone through the process yourself and still renewing on your E-2 visa.
Hey, I was saying to my clients that, I am considering other options, but we've been so busy that I never had time to attend to my own case. But somehow, I like to do it myself because I have, let's put it this way, had consultations with multiple attorneys, but I believe that my way of doing the case will be better. But I can resonate with and sometimes I'm thinking, you know what, I can just stay on an E-2. It resonates with my clients so well. I mean, I've been here for almost 10 years. I don't see, apart from not having the green card, right? The only difference between myself and a US citizen is their ability to vote and not my ability to stay or to run businesses or to do all sorts of things. So when you work with a good attorney, they will set you up to give you the most freedom, right? So I don't feel constrained on my E-2 visa in any way. So whether I get in the end a green card or not, it's not really that relevant to me because the business is successful anyway, right? Multiple businesses that I run. So I hope, and many clients, believe it or not, don't choose to pursue the green card because that involves all sorts of tax implications.
I would say the majority of our clients just want a green card for their children. So if your kids were born in the US, they don't really need a green card.
Exactly. So that's exactly what I'm saying. And even for the kids who age out, there's an option to make them either a F1 visa holder, or there's an option to make them a partner in your E2 business, right? And you're already invested a lot of money along the way. So there's nice ways. I mean, there's a ton of ways to make it work.
Where
And I'm
there's a
always
will, there's
like,
a way.
exactly, and that's my way of doing things.
Yeah, no, I see it.
Provided we stay, true to the E2 visa requirements, of course, or any other visas that I do, which is L1s or EB2 national interest waivers for entrepreneurs. But provided we stay true to the requirements, if there's a will, there's a way, and certainly with me.
Well, Kate, I really appreciate your time and all that you do for our clients. And for those that are interested, they can reach out directly to you and schedule a free consultation.
Awesome. Sounds good, Patrick. Thank you. Have a nice
Thanks,
day.
Kate.